our project is about analyzing San Diego traffic stops. My name is Ryan.
Hi, my name is Kasper.
My name is Brad.
So this is a little overview of our presentation today. We're going to start with the background of our project, and then we're going to talk about our data set that we used, and then the visuals that we made in order to display this data. And we're going to talk about two of the models that we did during our project, which was Kasper model and a machine learning model. And we're going to finish with significance of our project. So for some background, according to the Center for Policing Equity, Black people were stopped 3.5 times more than white people, and Black people were 4 times more likely to be subjected to force. So these numbers were very concerning to us, and we wanted to further investigate these facts. So for our big question, we came up with the question was, how does race affect the frequency of police traffic stops in San Diego? There are a lot of different approaches to answer this question, such as looking at like crime data or 9/11 calls, but we decided to approach this question by looking at traffic stops data. So about our data set, we actually got our data set from this website. It's called Open Policing Stanford. And what they did was they basically just collected a bunch of police records across the country and combined them into like one nice big data set that we could easily use. So we decided to do our data set on San Diego, obviously, and our time span ranges from 2014 to 2017. And some of the features of our data set was that it had information regarding the date of the stop, the time of the stop, the age of the subject, and the race of the subject. It also had information about the service area. And this is basically the area in San Diego that the traffic stop was made. And there's also information about type of vehicle, so whether or not the subject was in a car or in a motorcycle. And there's also information about whether or not the subject was arrested or they got a citation, a warning, or a search. And if they were searched, then there's also a reason for a search. And there's also a reason for why the police officer pulled over the subject in the first place. And finally, there's also information about raw action taken, which was the action that the police officer took against the subject. So while working on this project, we ran into some obstacles. The first one was missing data. So the whole length of our data set was like 380,000 like data points. And in order to solve this problem, all we did was just remove our missing data. And we only ended up removing about like 4,000 data points, which wasn't too much compared to our total data set. And our next obstacle was messy data entries. So as you can see in this last bullet point, this is like an example of one of our messy data entries. And this was pretty common in our data set. So all we had to do to fix this was just like split this string by a certain character. And as you can see on this graph in the right-hand side, this graph is a graph representing white searches per 100 stops. So this dotted line, this represents white searches, and this green line represents Hispanic searches, and this blue dot represents African-American populations. So as we can see, the blue dot and the green dot are higher than this dotted line for almost the whole x-axis, meaning that African-American people and Hispanic people are searched a lot more than white people in San Diego.
For the visualizations, our team did research and came up with the total number of stoppages by race from the ABOVE dataset and the distributions of race in San Diego from the worldpopulationsreview.com. We can see that white and Hispanic have the most populations and the most total stoppages in San Diego. White and Hispanic make 42.76% and 30.34% of the populations in San Diego respectively in 2022. But Black people have more population stopped than their populations. They only have 6.05% of the total populations in San Diego, but they have 9.92% of the total population stopped. Otherwise, Asian people have less, although they have 16.42% of the total number of populations, they only have 7.78% of the population stopped. And then the next one, we compare with the number of stoppages and the number of being arrested. The Black and Hispanic people both have more populations arrested than their population stopped. Black people only have 9.92% of total population stopped in San Diego, but they have 17.81% of population arrest. And Hispanic people only have 26.75% of total population stop, but they have 35.63% of population's arrest. And then the next one, we compare with the number of stoppages and the number of being searched. Black and Hispanic people also have more population search than their population stop. Black people only make 9.92% of total population stop in San Diego, but they have 17.81% of population arrest, and Hispanic people only make 26.75% of total population stop in San Diego, but they have 35.63% of population arrest. And then the next slide, different locations in San Diego. We found an article from the San Diego Union Tribune, which is stopped by police in San Diego. A lot depends on where you live, drive. According to this article, studies compared data in some community with traffic stops. We picked two communities in San Diego, which are La Jolla and Sencillo. La Jolla is the one with a majority of white populations, and Sencillo is with a majority of Hispanic populations. In these comparisons, on the left figure, we can see Sencillo made more violations and people stops than that of La Jolla. The figure on the right shows that in some race groups, the percentage stop even exceed the amount of populations. For example, one person might be stopped for more than once. Here, whites in Sencillo and Hispanics in La Jolla experience it. Black Americans experience this in both cities.
In addition, we decided to conduct a chi-square hypothesis test, and this test is basically used to compare observed results with expected results. And the purpose of this test was to determine if the difference between the observed data and the expected data is due to chance, or if there's a significant difference present that is not due to chance. So the null hypothesis that we wanted to test was the difference between the observed distribution of race and expected distribution of race due to chance? And the alternative is just the opposite, if the difference was not due to chance. And we decided to use a level of significance of 0.01. And when we conducted this test, we obtained a p-value of 0.0. And since the p-value is less than 0.01, there's enough evidence to reject the null hypothesis and evidence to support the alternative hypothesis that a significant difference is present between the two distributions that is not due to chance. And since there is support for the alternative hypothesis, there is some underlying reason why the two distributions are different. Racial bias could account for the difference, but we can't be certain.
For the next part of our project, we were interested in how the geography of San Diego could affect these arrest rates and the potential situation of racial disparity. So if we look at this figure right here on the right, we can see a map of San Diego, and this map is split into different service areas. So as we can see, each of these colors represents a different service area. So for North County San Diego, we have these red and purple areas, which are like mostly Oceanside, Torrey Pines, Rancho Bernardo. And then we have all of these surface areas down here, which represent South County. So comparing North County and South County, these are the distributions of the race over these service areas. So as we can see in North County, the white population is a lot more than in the South. And in the South, there are a lot more people of color because we can see Hispanic people make up 35% of South County, whereas in the North, it's only 15%. And another interesting fact that we discovered from our data was that in the South, search rates and arrest rates are higher. So 5% in the South, whereas it's only 3% in the North. And then the arrest rate is 0.5% higher in the South. So we can't say whether or not these rates are higher because there are more people of color in the South, but this is something interesting to point out. And next we have MDI, and this stands for median household income. And as we can see in the North, median household income is more than in the South by approximately $5,000.
In addition, we also decided to create a machine learning model. And our goal before we even created the model was to create a model that predicted the arrest rate of a service area given the race demographics of that service area. So the data we decided to use, there's a picture on the bottom of the slide that represents the first 2 rows of the data set. And as you can see, the first 5 columns all have to do with race. And the entry, for example, 8.414644, which is the first entry in the first row of the first column, represents that there's 8.41% Asian people. So we decided to use this as our data, and each row of the data set represents a specific service area. So we decided to use a decision tree regression model because the feature vectors and the response vector are all quantitative. And the features we used to train the model were the first 5 columns, and they represented the percentage of each race in a service area. And the response or predicted variable was the arrest rate of the service area. And we decided to use a 50-50 split of the test/training data because, or instead of the 75-25 split, for example, because we wanted to include enough training data to create a good model and more testing data to get better accuracy on the testing results. And when we attempted to test the performance of our model, we decided to perform 1,000 iterations of this model, and we calculated the mean squared error in each iteration. And then we calculated the mean of all those mean squared errors, and that number came out to 0.6273. So this means that on average, the predicted arrest rate for a service area for our model is approximately 0.6% off from the actual arrest rate in that service area.
So in conclusions, in Black and Hispanic groups, the population arrest and search are larger than the population stop percentage. They might be stopped for more than once per person. Second, even though San Diego has different population races, Black people still have more population stopped than their populations in many cities.
We also wanted to note that we discovered evidence to suggest that there is a significant difference between the observed and expected distribution of race. And another thing we wanted to note was, although some statistics and tests could be used to suggest racial bias, the presence of it cannot be proven. And further research is needed to investigate the effect of racial bias on traffic stops in San Diego. Some problems we came into when creating the ML model was trying to pick the right one. We also implemented other models such as linear regression, ridge regression, and k-nearest neighbors regression. And to overcome the problem of finding the right model, we extensively researched and implemented multiple ML regression models, and we just chose the right one. And last, for further analysis for the project, if we had more time, we would investigate the crime rates of San Diego and look into implementing an ANOVA test or any more statistical tests.
Thank you for listening, and a special thanks to Professor Ryan and Professor Virginia for helping us out with this project. Are there any questions?